Hello, everybody, and welcome to Acing the Interview Part 2, brought to you by Uncubed. I am joined here tonight by Cassidy Williams of Amazon, Sarah Hooker of Google, and Vicki Davis from Oracle. So we will start with intros. Cassidy, if you could tell us a little bit about what you do at Amazon and how you ended up there.
Sure. So, hi everyone. I'm Cassidy, and I'm the head of developer voice programs at Amazon. And that role is kind of a funky one with a kind of a fun title, but it's a combination of software engineering, developer evangelism, and some program management as well. And so, what I generally do is I kind of speak a lot to developers and to product teams internally, kind of build demos for kind of new released stuff that doesn't necessarily come out yet, and kind of just be that communicator between developers and like the developer facing teams and the product teams that are kind of building the next greatest thing but don't have a lot of access to their customers. And so it's kind of an interim role between teams. And I got here via Startup Land, actually. This is my first very big company. Before this, I was a senior software engineer at L4 Digital, which is a creative agency in Seattle. Really enjoyed that. And right before that, I was at Clarify in New York City. And before that, I was at Venmo in New York City. And all doing a combination of coding and developer evangelism for pretty much every role. And yeah, that's how I ended up here.
Excellent. We're going to head south to the Bay Area. Sarah, if we can kick this off with you.
Yeah, it was so fun hearing Cassidy's intro because we have a lot in common. So right now I'm part of the Brain residency, AI residency at Google, and the AI residency is a program for researchers of all different backgrounds to work on deep learning questions. And so my particular interest is how do we explain black box model predictions? And so deep neural networks, it's very hard to understand what leads to a certain prediction. And that's what I'm interested in solving right now. But kind of like Cassidy, prior to that, I really loved working at startups. And so I worked at Udemy, which is an online learning company, and there I did fraud and recommendation algorithms, and that was very cool in its own way because you're deploying, and so you get all this feedback about how your algorithms interact with the real world. And my background prior to that is economics. Like, I love economics, and so I did economic modeling for the Federal Trade Department and the DOJ, and so I was mainly antitrust cases. So figuring out is this antitrust behavior? Yeah, that's kind of my trajectory today. On parallel, I'd be really interested in the data for good space. So I started a nonprofit 4 years ago that's called Delta Analytics, and a lot of what we do is offer entirely volunteer run, and a lot of what we do is offer free data services to nonprofits, but also we build technical capacity around the world. So we teach machine learning. So just prior to Brain, I was teaching machine learning in Kenya.
Excellent. And Vicki, how about yourself?
Hi, everyone. I am a college recruiter with Oracle. I've been with Oracle for about 2.5 years. I think it'll be 3 years in the next month or two. Prior to that, I was in college career services. So I'm really familiar with the whole interview process, recruiting process from being with Oracle. And I do recruiting for everything from entry-level, full-time positions to internships. I am working with undergrads as well as graduate students across several different fields. So everything from, looking for data scientists to just basic sort of admin, summer interns, really, entry-level internships and that sort of thing. So that's my background.
Excellent. Thank you. And I realized I didn't give a quick intro about myself. My name is Brian. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Uncubed, and I'm filling in for Chanel this evening. Vicki, if we can jump back to you for this one. So interviews are obviously a stressful experience for most folks. And you've dealt with a lot of students throughout your career, especially within higher education. What has been one of the most common challenges or most common Where have you seen students struggle the most when they're entering the interview process? Where do they get stuck? What's the part that they worry about following that they wish they had done better?
Usually what I've seen is students really struggle with just knowing how to communicate about their experience. So, and I think they feel nervous about it. It's like, what do I say? What can I say? What shouldn't I say? And one thing that I would want everyone to know and to remember is that it's a conversation. You're speaking with someone who maybe has a little more experience than you do in terms of their professional life, but they started in your shoes, and they really are they really want to hear about you in the best way possible. So for me, because I'm a recruiter, I'm oftentimes the first point of contact for a student interviewing. And I don't try to trip them up. I really want them to have a good experience, because if they're nervous, I'm not seeing the best candidate I can see. And that's my goal. I want to see the best, representation of yourself as I can. So I'm going to try to, coach you along and help you along so that I get the information that I need and put you at ease so that you're more comfortable. But yeah, the knowing how to talk about your experience and not being terribly nervous. Just remember, I'm a regular person.
And Cassidy, I guess from your experiences at both small and large, were there any times when you said, shoot, I really wish I had done that better?
I can't count the number of times I've said, gee, I wish that could have gone better. I have had some terrible interviews. A lot of times people, like, when I've talked about getting certain numbers of job offers or deciding between things, they're just like, wow, interviewing must be so easy for you. It's not. I just approach things with mass quantities. When I'm looking for a job, I apply to so many jobs and go through so many interviews, and with the mass quantities, you get a few good results, and that's what's great. I've had some nasty interviews where I've had to cut it off in the middle of the call and say, this isn't going well, we should stop, shouldn't we? And they're just like, yeah. So it happens to everyone. I don't think that anyone should put their value in a bad interview or let themselves get caught up in a bad interview, because everybody has had them. And it's worth it to just keep pushing forward and keep applying.
And has there been an incredibly triumphant moment for you, one where you've been sitting in the interview and you're just like, I nailed that?
Yes, those feelings are, oh my gosh, it's like its own high, being able to just walk out of an interview and be just like, I crushed that. That's a great feeling. And usually when I have had that feeling, it's because I have gone in somewhat confident and I'm just putting it all out there. And there have been times where I go in confident and I come out a little wounded, but I think those types of interviews are really good just for learning in general. And even if you think you did well and you don't necessarily get the offer, it's always good to just follow up and ask, what could I have done better? And kind of just review the problems that you might have gone through. And a lot of times those problems will come back again, kind of like when you're in elementary school and you forget how to spell that one letter in the spelling bee. You will remember that letter for the rest of your life. You will always remember that word. And it's the same thing with interview questions. Every single interview question that I have bombed in the past, I know how to solve it to a T now, because it has just haunted me and I've studied it and I'm ready to go because of it.
And Sarah, you joined Google, you said a year and a half ago?
Yeah, I joined a year ago.
Okay, and obviously Google is notorious for what can sometimes be a complex interviewing process. So what did you do to stay calm and confident throughout that?
So I think what both Vicky and Cassidy said really resonated, in the sense that I think what they're both describing is that often a terrible interview is when you yourself mentally shift at some point. and like you feel like you either hit a tough question and there wasn't a smooth transition, or you were backed into a corner. And I think terrible interviews are often when you kind of psychologically give up a little, and great interviews often, I find, are when you have great conversations. And like it ends up being like this back and forth with your interviewer. It ends up being like, oh, this is this really interesting project that they're working on. And particularly since the focus of this is research, in research in particular, great interviews are when you find someone that's doing exciting things in an area that you're really passionate about, and you just, it's like ignites. You're like, oh, and what have you thought about this? And they have thought about that. And then you learn something from the interview itself. And I would say, like, at least my experience in the Google process for the AI residency, it was a culmination of like so many different areas of interest, like both being an engineer, but also doing research, that I found that that was present in a lot of my interviews. And the other thing that I think is important to remember is that from the side of the company, they should never make you feel like you are backed into a corner in an interview room. I think that's another big, what makes it a terrible interview moment is when the interviewer is trying to get this one answer out of a candidate. And unfortunately, that's both not a good measure of intelligence. And also it's just not, it derails the rest of the time. And like for companies, they have this limited amount of time in which they can see a candidate. And I think, you know, Vicky has a lot of experience seeing many different candidates, but also for the candidate, I have a limited time that I'm seeing this company, and often I'm interviewing at multiple different companies. And so it's just as precious for both sides. And I think that if it's a terrible interview, it's normally either because the interviewer has backed you into a corner and they won't let go. They're like, but what about this one point? And they're just looking for that one check mark, which is unfortunate. Or the candidate just loses their sense of self. And what Cassidy was describing when she was saying it was a great interview because I just went in feeling great, like everyone knows that moment where you feel like you just go in with a momentum and then it carries you through. Because it's really tiring doing interviews, and it's tiring thinking about opportunities in general, because like these are big life shifts in a way. So like going in with that energy is often what makes the difference, I think.
And Vicky, do you have any best practices or tips for how you can go in with that confidence? Some tactical steps for how to prepare for that first interview?
So it's boring, but research. Research the company, research the position as much as you can find. I mean, don't just look up the company's Wikipedia or their, website. Really do some research. Look at everything. Look at current events in the news. Are they in the news? Look for lawsuits that the company has filed against their competitors. Look at lawsuits that are filed against that company. I mean, just look everywhere you can to try to find information about the company. And look up your interviewer. You probably know the name of the person who's going to be interviewing you before you pick up that phone or walk into that office. Look them up on LinkedIn. Know what their career path has been. I mean, you don't have to go and memorize it all and sort of be stalkerish about it and repeat it back to them and say that you know every single step that they made. But have a good idea of how they got to where they are, and if you find some connection, if you find something in their background that is a commonality between you, bring it up. I love talking with students who know that where I worked before Oracle, and are brave enough to bring it up and make the interview go from interview sort of status to conversation status. I hate it when that feeling, and I'm sure you guys all know, where you do feel like you're being grilled. You're in front of a firing squad and it's rapid fire questions, and I don't like that kind of interview. I don't do that kind of interview. And I think that that's very stressful. But if you're having a conversation with your interviewer, then, it flows, it's just a better experience.
And so from that conversation, what should the goals of the candidate be? If they're walking away from that first screen, what should they now know about the process or about you as the company or about the job after that first interview?
All really they should know is that they want to move forward or not. I mean, there's no way after an initial phone screen or an initial contact that they're going to know necessarily that, yes, this is the company for me, perfect, yay. But they should have a sense that, oh gosh, yeah, this is great. I'm liking what I'm hearing. It feels really good. I definitely want to move forward. And, really, I think a lot of students who are interviewing put a lot of pressure on themselves to have that sort of final answer and that concrete conclusion. And it's very much, it's like dating. When I was in higher ed, I used to tell students this all the time. Interviewing is like dating. It's pretty rare for you to go on a first date and know that that's the person that you want to spend the rest of your life with. So it's the same for interviewing. You just get a sense that there's a good feeling, you want to move forward, you want to learn more, or not.
And I will add, if you have that feeling, you should send a thank you note to your interviewer.
Oh my gosh, yes. So I heard a statistic a long time ago, and I thought it was really low. So this was when I was in higher ed. I heard that only 7% of students will send a thank you note. So it's a really super easy way to make yourself stand out. Now that I've been in recruiting, I think that number is actually lower. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah, so it's very, I mean, I interview hundreds of students in the course of a year, and it's well below 7% that will send a thank you note. So
I think that's so shocking to hear. I mean, this is the other thing that I would say. So, Vicky, you mentioned you can know who's interviewing you. So actually, that's one thing I didn't know earlier in my career, that often, like, you can ask your point of contact to, your recruiter to give you the names of people that will be interviewing you. And particularly if it's for a more research-heavy role, make sure that you've read their papers, because that's what's going to make the conversation interesting. And on the thank you note, I mean, also, I think thank you notes shouldn't, what I would also say is don't write a generic thank you note, because it's almost as if you hadn't written a thank you note. Like, try and think about what you actually did value about this interaction. Because remember that for a lot of organizing an onsite is a big cost to everyone involved, because it's the candidate's time, but it's also everyone taking multiple, probably senior people or mid-level people taking an hour of their day at minimum, and then writing up their notes afterwards, and then deciding like whether you're good enough or not. And so if they do it because they're really invested in like bringing the best people on board. And so, thank you notes are kind of just also in the long term, just nice things to send people on.
Yeah, and for, I don't know about bigger companies as much, but especially for smaller companies, they make a huge difference in just putting your name at the top of the pile, honestly, just because it shows that you care more than just the interview and like the opportunity. You care about the people that you spend time with.
Yeah, and I would add to that, when you send your thank you note, do it within 24 hours of the interview. And that sounds, silly, but honestly, with the way my days roll out, if you don't send it within, a day, you're kind of forgotten already. I mean, you're not forgotten by any means, but, time, everything moves really fast in a recruiter's world. And certainly where the interviewers are concerned, if you forgot to ask about, email addresses to send them a thank you note, then ask the recruiter. They'll get you the email addresses, but do it right away, because, the people who took the time to interview you are super busy, and, they really, that thank you note really does make a difference. It can make or break the interview, the moving forward or not, if they're sort of on the fence about a candidate.
And when you're seeing that many candidates, what stands out to you? I guess separate from a thank you note, but what is, if you walk away and you're going to remember this candidate, I think this is a really strong candidate, I want to advance them, what is it that you're remembering?
So we jokingly, I jokingly call it the X factor. So it's not usually something that you can put your finger on like, oh, they have all the right skills and experience for this position. It comes down to how was the conversation. So I'll call it a conversation, not an interview, but how was the conversation? Are they someone that I would want to work with? You know, do I, for us in our culture, usually that's a, you know, pretty good way of measuring a candidate's, you know, how they're going to do. And it makes them stand out. If we were able to have a conversation about, okay, so a candidate and I were from the same town, so we know the same great burger joint to go to, and we had a great conversation. So I mean, this is a real student. I will always remember him. And whenever I see him on campus, I'm able to ask, you know, hey, have you been to that place before, you know, or since we spoke last? And, you know, so those are things that, be human to be memorable. That's all you need to be. Just be yourself.
I just wanted to add on something to that, because I think a different way of saying that is be authentic, which sounds very like vague. And I almost apologize for saying it because it's not very concrete, but maybe I'll give a concrete example of what my brother recently went through. So my little brother is just about to graduate from university, and he just did his degree in mathematics, and he's applying for finance positions. He's very interested in quantitative finance. And he did his interview day, and I think the biggest place where you're not authentic for candidates is when you feel pressure and you want to say you know something, but you don't. Let's just be. And he was in a situation where he had been through the whole day and he was kind of tired. And he had been asked in 2 separate interviews, what's your biggest weakness? So in the first one, he had prepared something, kind of like one of those questions that is, you know, I mean, no, I don't particularly like it. But anyways, they asked him this. But then another interviewer asked him again. And because he's young and because he's school, he thought it might be a test. He's not that used to interviews. So he thought maybe it's a test and I should come up with something different. So he stalled because he was thinking of something different. And then they were like, it's okay if you don't have anything embarrassing. He's like, no, I do have embarrassing things. I'm just trying to think about it. But he came up with something that was actually probably more honest because firstly, he just said, oh, I left, I was doing the internship at another bank and I left my computer open. So it's a safety thing. But I think what was more is that he kind of just joked about it. And I think that instead of trying to, often the turning point for an interview is that if you don't know something, you're like, oh, how would you approach it instead? So I think like understanding that it's a conversation and that you don't have to come with, particularly since, you know, we've talked mainly thus far about positions straight out of undergraduate, definitely straight after undergraduate, you're not expected to have a thorough domain knowledge. In fact, domain knowledge is really tested straight out of undergraduate. It's all about these malleable skill sets of like, do you have potential? Do you have determination? Do you have like passion and interest? This is kind of like, I think, you know, these like conversational qualities. And there, it's even more refreshing to hear someone say, I haven't really thought about that, but let me think about it. And that's why the best questions at that level are open-ended questions, because it's really about how do you think rather than what do you know. And even when you're much further along and like, for example, doing research, which is very domain specific, it's much more useful to have these more open-ended questions still, because even then you'll be surprised at how people take the same question in different directions.
And Cassie, what are some of your favorite questions to receive that you can kind of talk through with the interviewer?
So one of my favorite questions to receive, like as a candidate?
As a candidate, yeah, but I do want to hear your perspective after from the interviewer side.
Yeah. So as a candidate, questions that I really like to receive are about hobbies, or just like what I like to do outside of work, or just things outside of just coding, or yeah, stuff like that. Because, for example, one of the things that I really like to do, I like building mechanical keyboards. I'm actually wearing a keyboard t-shirt from a mechanical keyboard meetup. It's very nerdy, but I love it. And when an interviewer asks me that question and I can speak passionately about all of the different components of keyboards that I like to build and my design process and stuff, I can tell like they kind of get on board. They're just like, oh, that does sound cool. And then we can have more of a back and forth because I'm excited about it. And they like hearing the excited side of it. And if they do decide to stay on the technical side, asking questions like, what's the most interesting problem you've had to solve? It's fun to both get and receive those questions because you get to see, from the interviewer's perspective, you get to see the candidate kind of think through how they solved it, and they kind of go into that like space zone of like, I remember I had to write this for loop that, you know, and it's just kind of fun to see them think about that. But then it's also fun when you've received that question to be able to talk about your thought process and why it was a cool problem, why you found it interesting. The hands down, those are the most fun questions to receive and give. And as a candidate, one question that I always like to give my interviewer as kind of like my test for a company culture is what's most important to you, your product, your customers, or your employees? And it's really interesting to see across, especially like if you're in an on-site, to see if everybody has either the same answer or different answers or how they answer it. Because typically when I've seen companies where everybody says customers hand down, like as their first thing, they have a very solid customer focused culture. And none of the answers are wrong for sure, but it's great when there's unity across the answers and you can see how people are focused on the same thing and have like the same goals and how like strong the company culture is.
I like that one a lot. Where did you learn that question? Was it from another interview or a blog that you were reading, or you just sprung to your mind?
I think I read it on Quora actually, like back like 5 years ago or something. And I remember just seeing someone say that they asked that, and I was like, I'm going to ask that from now on. And I ask that at every single interview I've ever been in, and it's been a great kind of like gauge for different teams and companies for sure.
And Vicky, what's the question that you always ask if you're being interviewed?
Gosh, it's been a long time since I've been interviewed. So, you know, I don't have a go-to. One question that I love when students will ask is if I have any question or any concerns about their qualifications. And the reason that I love that question is because to me it shows a real comfort with the interview process and a real confidence that they are open to hearing feedback about who they are and how they interviewed. And, you know, it kind of goes back to the whole nervousness thing and how nervous a candidate is. But if they can ask that, then it tells me that once they're in the job place, they're going to be open to training and learning and feedback. And so it kind of, in that one question, encompasses all of those different aspects. Not many students ask it. A few do. And so back to the point of what makes them memorable, that is one of the questions that they ask that will make them memorable.
And what do you think can help a student stay calm during that interview process?
Well, kind of the things that I've said before, remembering it's a conversation, doing your research. I mean, you know, if you think about it, if you're a student and you are going into an exam and you haven't done any studying, you're probably not going to feel really good about it. You're going to be nervous about it. It's the same with an interview. If you've done some research about the position, about the company, then you're going to go in, and if you know that it's just a conversation, you're going to go in, you're going to have that confidence to really talk about things like your hobbies, like, you know, what gets you excited? What are you passionate about? Because, you know, at the end of the day, I want to hire someone as a recruiter. I want to bring someone in who's excited to be there, who's excited about what we do, who's excited about, you know, the job that they're going to be doing, someone that has that passion and excitement for the job. So, yeah, and then hopefully, you know, hopefully the recruiter is going to set the stage for them to feel comfortable. I know when students tell me, and I like it when they do this too, if they're nervous and tell me that, I always do a timeout and say, hey, let's regroup, let's restructure this and, approach it another way just to get them, sort of calm again and comfortable again.
So it's okay for the candidate to vocalize to you?
Oh, absolutely. And again, to me, that says, even though they're nervous, they're comfortable being authentic and being themselves, just being a normal person. It really puts the conversation on a person-to-person level, not an interviewer to candidate level. I mean, it just, to me, it gives me the opportunity to, again, calm the candidate down so that I get to see the best candidate I can see. Because really, that's my goal. Interviews are weird. I want to see the real person.
Awesome. And next, I'd love to kind of walk through for everybody who's watching what the interview process has looked like for you in the past. And maybe we can just start with your most recent example. So from the time that you've applied, who did you hear from? What did that next round look like? And then what were the steps advancing along the way? So was the first step a coding challenge before you moved on to a phone screen? Or Sarah, if we can start with you on that.
So the AI residency is both research and coding interviews. And so the coding interviews are traditional software Google engineering interviews. And the way that it's structured is that if you've been in industry before, so if you've been primarily an engineer before, your first interview is a research hangout interview. And if you've been primarily in academia before, your first interview is a coding interview. And I think that's mainly to say, I actually don't have insight into the reasoning, but I imagine it's mainly to get a sense of people's weaknesses early on. And so because I was in industry and I was in engineering, my first interview was a research interview. And that was really interesting. It was really a test of both fundamental understanding of machine learning, mathematical questions, and then discussion about my projects. And so I think the one thing that is really important, Cassidy kind of mentioned this idea of tell me about a challenge that you worked on. And so with the research interviews, it's mainly like, tell me about a problem that you tackled and like your interest in research. Following that, and that's a hangout interview. Following that, the rest of the interviews are all in person. And actually, because it's for an AI residency, you meet other candidates who are also applying on the day that you come to the Google campus. And that's actually really, really exciting in a way. Because I remember I came and we were all in the kind of this waiting room, and I was like, oh my gosh, so what do you guys do? This is really, it was just, everyone was so incredibly accomplished, and I felt like it almost was just a very cool start to the day to be connecting with people with similar interests. And so everyone is split off, and then you have coding interviews and research interviews, and then you have a lunch, and then afterwards they let you know. And so in many ways it is identical, in fact, to like a lot of the research interviews that you would do for any position across, except this is in brain, so the focus is on deep neural networks. Yeah, feel free to guide me to provide more detail about any piece, but that's kind of the lay of the land.
That was very helpful, and it was also helpful to hear that what you were going through was, I'd say, probably a unique experience from what a lot of folks watching might normally go through. Cassidy, what was the interview process like for you?
Sure. So
sorry if
Amazon's
I quick too, because you also had startup interviews, so I'd love to hear kind of side by side.
Yeah. Yeah, so Amazon has been completely different from all previous companies because they were all small. In every single one of my previous companies, it started with a phone call, then a code challenge where they sent me some problem to make, and then if that goes well, an on-site. And then sometimes the on-site, like you end up pair programming on the code challenge that you worked on, or at least talking about it. So that has been every process before. At Amazon, Amazon has this whole thing about being peculiar, and they have the 16 leadership principles, and everybody knows them. I have them on my badge. They're just huge at Amazon. Like, you can find them publicly too. And every single question you get will be testing you on one of those leadership principles, whether you're technical or not. And so for my role, because it's like a combo role of different kinds, I had the phone calls and then I went to on-site. And for on-site, it was part technical, where it was like code on a whiteboard type stuff. And then the rest, and this is for all engineers, it's not all technical. They do a lot of behavioral questions, which is kind of unusual for a big company. Like, I've interviewed with the Microsofts and the Googles and different companies. And it's kind of rare to see that. But with Amazon, every single question will be a leadership principle. So, for example, customer obsession. They'll ask you some question to find out how obsessed are you with your customers? How much do you care about your customers? One of the leadership principles is ownership. And so they'll ask you something about, like, could you talk about a time where you took ownership over a project or something like that? And so the key for Amazon interviews, for anybody watching ever, whoever might interview with Amazon, come up with a story, come up with 2 stories for every single leadership principle. And in the question, you'll be able to figure out which leadership principle you're being asked about and just go with that. And guaranteed, every single round, in an on-site especially, will cover at least 2 or 3 of those principles. And everyone I know who has gone through this process, who has like written up the stories, they say they just kind of like kicked off their stories and kind of dove deep into those stories, which diving deep is one of the leadership principles. They kind of dove deep into their stories, where they told the basics and then kind of kept digging into it with the interviewers. And yeah, that's kind of how the process went. And then Amazon, because they're very like customer obsessed, they talk about it all the time, literally every meeting. They consider you as an interview candidate their customer and want to ensure that you have a good experience. And so you can like continue to ask your recruiter any questions you want until you hear back, and they always try to get back to you within a week, whether or not you got the job.
Awesome. And we actually have a question from a community member that's related to it. So she has a background in customer service, and she was wondering if she doesn't have any recent relevant experience in the industry of the company that she's applying to. What are some ways that she might be able to draw from past experiences to demonstrate relevance? So again, if she works in customer service, what are some tips you might give her that would resonate with Amazon's leadership principle of, what was it, customer
obsession? I think that's the perfect entryway into a company like Amazon, having that kind of customer support background. What's great about a lot of companies is, like, yes, if you haven't been in X role in a little while, like, they'll still give you a chance if you can prove yourself. And if you can get that foot in the door, which getting that foot in the door will sometimes involve going to meetups or hackathons or conferences or something, kind of getting that face-to-face. But let's just say you have the foot in the door and you kind of have all of this older experience. Talk about it, but then talk about what you've learned since then. Saying, well, in my previous role when I was doing customer service, this is how I approached X, Y, and Z. But today, because I'm not doing that anymore, this is kind of how I approach it now and how I would approach it if I were to take this kind of role. And kind of do it that way, where acknowledge the past, but focus on the present and future.
If I may, I would just want to add on something there, because I think Cassidy said something really important, which is to acknowledge the past. I think I've seen candidates who are just like oddly ashamed of everything that's happened before they decide to switch careers. And in some cases, that's like incredibly accomplished backgrounds. The most probably like extreme case of this is my brilliant friend who did a PhD in English literature and then decided that she wants to hide it under the rug because now she's in engineering. And in fact, like, the skill set that you use for a PhD in English literature, there's so many interesting things about how we communicate and how we use words, and coding is a language in itself. And so you should always just think about, like, what skill sets did I learn here? And then talk about problems that were interesting in your past that gave you a new perspective in coding, in engineering, or in research. But the worst thing is to pretend that I did this, but no, I'm really interested in this. It comes across as you're not at ease with it, and it's an odd. You can always tell when someone your candidate or someone that you know says that, because it makes you feel sorry for them when in fact you shouldn't, because it's an exciting change they made. Whereas if you embrace your past and say, but now I'm excited about this, then you're with them, you know, you want to see them accomplish this new journey. So that I would just add that.
I have a similar friend where he was a lawyer like a year and a half ago and decided he just wanted to learn how to code. And now he's an engineer at Amazon. And he did this whole transition, and he was really worried about the on-site interview having to talk about how this would be his first tech job, and he only worked at law firms before this. And instead, after like calming him down a bit, he totally embraced it, and he would say, well, I was a lawyer, so here's how I used to approach problems. I approach them now this way, but I think there's a good combination of the two. And like, he just kind of framed his stories around that, and he's an engineer now and got the job. And so I totally agree. Like, embrace your past because it's a part of you.
Awesome. And then last but not least, Vicky, what does the candidate journey at Oracle look like?
It kind of depends on the position. It also depends on the department. Okay. So some departments are sort of one and done, or not one and done, but they have a very quick, streamlined interview process. And some are a little bit more labor intensive, little more of a labor of love. So for all candidates, they'll start with a pre-screen interview. And then they'll move to usually a phone interview. And the phone interviews typically are not technical. If the candidate is local, then we'll bring them in. If they're out of town, then we'll either do a series of video or phone interviews. And when they're at the second interview with the hiring team, if it's a technical position, then yeah, you're going to get technical questions. So I've had feedback that some candidates just don't know how to do that deep dive into their technical skills, into the projects that they've worked on. But, you know, and that they'll get a ding on the interview. They may be passed over because they don't know how to speak about their technical experience. So I know even for me in a pre-screen, I'm gonna sort of test the waters on that and ask a candidate to go deeper into their technical information, just so that I can know, you know, if they're comfortable in that space. They need to be able to talk about things high level, but also, you know, go deep. After a technical interview with the hiring team, sometimes there's an occasional third interview, but oftentimes we'll then just move them to offer. And it just kind of depends on the department. There are all kinds of variations in that.
Excellent. And one thing that I forgot to ask, Cassidy, have you had any founder level interviews? And if so, how did that differ from what you might have gone through at a larger company?
Yes, and those have mostly been just like very personal. Like at Clarify, he was a technical guy, and so he did a lot of the technical questions for me as well. But with founders, this is like their baby. This company is something that they want to like nurture and grow and be a success, whether it's to be bought or to eventually get giant. So founder interviews, I think it's kind of just showing your passion, not just for their company, but your own passions, and kind of figure out how you can marry your passions with theirs. And for example, in my founder interview with Clarify, they are an AI startup that do image recognition. I talked a lot about how I really like just communicating with developers, giving talks, kind of seeing that aha moment when I've taught someone something and they get all excited about it. I talked a lot about that because it's just a part of my job that I've always loved. And then the founder pulled out his phone and he showed this like image recognition thing. And I kind of had that aha moment saying, oh, so you can just do this. And like, we kind of bonded over that. And kind of just finding that shared passion for something really can make the interview be a success. And the founder at a startup has the final say too. And there have been times where we're not entirely sure from an engineering perspective if a candidate is strong, but as a founder says, no, wait, I tested them on this, they're good, they kind of have the final say. So it's definitely an important interview. And if you're talking to a company that is less than 50 people, maybe 80 people, you should try to make a point of at least being able, if you don't get to see the founder in person, at least try to email or have a phone call with the founder, because I think that's really important, especially for small companies.
Excellent. And this question, I guess, goes to anyone who may have had this experience, but when you're on site, what do you feel like you can kind of get away with in terms of probing into the culture? Can you say, I want to walk around the office, I want to talk to people on the team that I might be working on or teams that I might be working alongside? Is there a limit to it? Are there certain things that you feel comfortable asking when you're there to make sure that it is the right fit for you and the place that you would share the same passion as the employees that you're working with?
I have a story. So at large companies, there's not as much leeway just because that's not really how it works as much. But at my previous company, L4, when I was interviewing with them, all of my interviewers were men. And I was just like, okay, as much as they seem like very nice people, everybody seems nice until like something goes wrong. And so I straight up told my last interview and I said, okay, I appreciate all of this. Can I talk to a woman? I just want to find out if this will be a good fit for me and how the culture is from a woman's perspective. And they were just like, oh, yeah, okay, let me find someone. And they brought someone over and it was great because she was able to be reassuring. And she said, no, yeah, it's totally male dominated here, but I'm totally comfortable with everyone. We've never had any incidents or anything. You'll be okay. And being able to have that kind of reassurance and the ability to ask and get a yes totally changed my perspective. I was so comfortable with them as a company. And also I was able to just kind of go in knowing that it would be okay if I accepted this job offer. Yeah, that's probably the biggest thing I've been able to get away with.
Do we have any others? Sarah, Vicky?
I think so the questions that I always, well, firstly, I think the biggest difference from starting out and your first job that you're applying to, and as you go further in your career, is knowing that you can ask. And so that's really cool in itself. Like also knowing, Vicky described the anxiety that people have at the beginning of even chatting with her, but also knowing that Vicky is your friend and you can ask her questions and she's there for both. So, I mean, I think the things that I always like to ask are really detailed things about what projects do you think you're excited about this year and are definitely on the agenda. Because you want to know, there's a role description, right? But often there's also what you will own. And particularly earlier on in your career, the biggest difference between how accelerated your growth is the project that you own. And so having a director who gives you a project that's probably just a little out of your current ability but believes in you, that's like game changer moment. That's like when you can really, if you knock that out of the park, then it really amplifies your impact and you can go much further. So that's a key question. The second thing is, what's the infrastructure? Like at a smaller company, if it's not a Google, you should be asking this question. If it's a startup, ask like what's your infrastructure stack like? If you're working in data engineering or research, you want to know that they've got a handle on it, or else you're going to spend your entire time like troubleshooting infrastructure problems. So that's like a good set of just like technical questions that they should be able to answer. And then the third thing is, talk to someone who is at your level, who's more of a buddy, and be like, will I have a buddy starting? And is it possible for me to like take this buddy to lunch? Like often that comes after they've decided it's a yes on you and now you're trying to decide on them, but I still think it's useful. And you go and you ask them questions that maybe you don't feel comfortable asking at director level. If you do feel comfortable asking at director level, go for that. I mean, why not? Often that's like the most transparent, but again, like depending on where you are in your growth, I find that when I think back on when I first started, I was so nervous. I even thought if I said something, they might take my offer away. And I think the other thing I would say, which is particular to my situation, is I've been on a visa my entire career. So I'm not from the US. I started on OPT and then I was on H-1B. And I was terrified of telling recruiters that I needed a visa. when I first started looking for jobs, because it's just there's so few positions that do sponsor. It wastes everyone's time if you don't say it up front. Having learned from painful experience, like I think, obviously you want to get your foot in the door and your thought is they're going to love me and then they'll make it happen. But these things are hard. And so I think if you face visa constraints, which many, many people do, I would just be candid about it up front, and I would focus on the few companies that are willing to make that commitment, and be candid. Startups are also surprisingly much more willing to make visa commitments, mainly because when they see someone good, as Cassidy pointed out, when they see you and they want you and you connect on a fundamental level, they're gonna go the extra mile for you.
Another one for small companies is asking about the onboarding process. Because, like, for example, at one of the companies I went to, there was none. They gave me a used laptop and they're just like, okay, and that was it. And I had no idea, like, if I was supposed to start coding. I had no idea what my tasks were. It was completely just like, well, I guess I'll install Chrome. Like, I had no guidance whatsoever. And that is something that can happen with really small companies. But then, for example, I loved Venmo's onboarding process, where they had us do 2 weeks of just partnering up with a more experienced engineer and doing bug fixes. And we just got to know the code base really, really well because you were fixing it. And you just kind of got to navigate and see how another developer was coding. And then there have been these two most previous companies, they've kind of had a checklist, and you go through the checklist, you know exactly the steps, and then you can ask for steps beyond that. Kind of just knowing what to expect going in is really nice, because otherwise you can feel like you're floundering a little bit.
Okay, so we're coming up toward the end. I think there are two questions that I want to hear from each of you on, but the first one we'll start with is, you go through the interview process, you're really excited, you feel like you knocked it out of the park. How do you ask? How do you find out what the next step is? How do you lead into, so when do I hear from you? Did I get the job? What's the right way to approach that? And Vicky, if we can start with you on this.
Yeah, just be bold, just ask. It's another thing that it seems like recently a lot of students have not been asking me, and I'll just tell them because, I want them to know, especially if it's a good, solid candidate, I want them to know what's coming at them. But no, just ask, just put it out there. I mean, because that is the whole purpose that, we are on the phone together, is you want a job. So it's a natural thing to ask, what are the next steps? When will I hear back? When will a decision be made? Frame it however you want to frame it, however you're comfortable asking it, but don't forget to ask it. And if you do forget to ask it, then that's a perfect thing to include in your thank you note that you're going to now be writing. Just say, hey, thanks for the time. I forgot to ask, what are the next steps? When will I be hearing back? But yeah, just ask, because you do need to know. You're not going to just sit around waiting forever for a response from, this tiny company or this, giant, corporation. So ask.
I agree. That's pretty much what I was going to say. Like, make that the number one question that you're going to come out with, where even if you just ask your interviewer saying, hey, do you know what the timeline is? That's how I always frame it, asking what the timeline is rather than when will I hear back from you. I say, well, so what are the timelines and next steps? And if they don't know, they'll say, I'm not sure, but I'll ask the recruiter, or you should ping the recruiter. And there's always a doorway, and they expect that question. So don't ever think that it's being pushy to ask it, because you should. They expect it. It's like the most natural thing after an interview.
One thing I will say is that, so Vicky compared this to dating earlier, and I think that just like dating, so the brain residency, the AI residency was unique for me because I loved my role at Udemy, and this was the only thing I applied for, because I'm like, this is the only thing that would really get me to switch. But I think that if there's not something that's, I actually think that most times that you want to do a switch in your life, don't do that. It worked out. I'm like really grateful, and I do love my job, but I think that, spread there's many opportunities out there, and often the things that you think you really want, something else, once you go on site and like interview there, you're gonna also love. And from the recruiter side, it provides more urgency, and you are more compelling if there's a scarcity problem. So if multiple companies are saying we want you, then that you now control the timeline. Let's be honest. And so that's the most powerful place you can be in as a candidate, because then you can say, hey, I'm currently in 4 interview processes, and like 2 are getting back to me next week, and I really want to consider you. And so remember that also the more interviews you do, the better you are. It's a skill set, and it's also a sense of ease, like it's comfort level with yourself. And so I would really highly recommend, don't get invested. I love Google, but don't get invested, I really want to work for Google. Because really, the much more interesting things for your career as a whole are working on problems, not working at places. And so you have to be thinking widely about what problems interest me. And there are many places to work at problems. And I would highly encourage anyone to not fixate on a single opportunity or a single timeline. Like, in fact, like the more different places you interview will tell you, inform you more about what you like and you dislike. Cassidy and I have both worked at small places and big places. And I sense from the way, Cassidy, you talk and from what I'm talking, I think there's things we like about both. I think that working at both has taught us what we like and what we don't like about each one. And that's useful. That's kind of informative for our long-term trajectories. That's all I would add.
That's perfect, and that leads into the last question, since it's almost the end of the hour. But you're back at your first interview ever. What do you wish somebody had told you then? And Sarah, I liked. You'll definitely have an opportunity to come up with another, but I really liked what you were saying about choose problems, not places. So if you want to come up with another, please do. But Vicky, if we can start with you on that. Again, it's your first interview. You're in the chair, white knuckling the armrests. What do you wish you had told yourself?
Oh my gosh. That it's just a conversation, that it doesn't matter if I get the job or not, that this is good practice. If I don't get the job, it's practice for the next interview. I'll be better in the next, gosh, I don't even know how I would talk myself off that ledge. I was pretty young when I did my first interview. I think I was 13 or 14. Life experience, life will sort of take care of some of the nerves itself. The more you interview, Sarah, I think you said it, the more you interview, the better you become. It is a skill set. Being comfortable speaking about yourself can be hard, but, just remember that, you kind of do it all the time. If you think about like family gatherings, when all the relatives descend for Thanksgiving and all the aunts and uncles you haven't seen for a long time are kind of interviewing you. Oh, what are you doing? What are you majoring? What companies have you interviewed with? It's kind of like that. So just being comfortable with yourself and your skin and talking about yourself. So yeah, that's probably what I would tell myself. Just relax. You'll get a job. Don't worry about it.
I remember my first interview, they had us, it was my first on-site interview too, and they had us in a rotation, so that way like there was another candidate interviewing in the same room that you were going to interview in next. And I wish I had told myself to stop comparing myself to other candidates, because the candidate in front of me, she was a hilarious person, and she's actually one of my best friends today. Funny how that works. But she was making every single interviewer in front of me laugh hysterically. And I could tell every single time I went into that room, they had been laughing so hard. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I'm not funny. And I was just like freaking out and realizing, oh crap, I have to like live up to this girl who was in front of me. And she and I both ended up getting offers. I didn't have to worry. She and I actually both ended up getting offers at another company too, and we went to the other company. But if I had stopped comparing myself to her, I would have enjoyed that interview process so much more. Instead, I was just a nervous wreck watching her like charm the pants off of people. But It worked out in the end, but that's definitely, I think there's this one Mark Twain quote called "Comparison is the death of joy." And that's one that I tell people all the time, where if you compare yourself to another student or a coworker or just other people in the room, you will always feel like you aren't meeting the bar in some way. There will always be people who are better than you at one thing, and there might be cases where you're just better at a bunch of people than another thing. But if you keep comparing yourself, first of all, you're never going to be really happy with yourself because you're always going to wish that you had more. But also, it doesn't foster a good community around you either, because you'll constantly feel competitive with people. You won't necessarily always feel happy for other people either. And it won't present yourself with just a good network that you can use, both to your benefit and to the benefit of others down the line. And so, yeah, don't compare yourself to people. That's my big thing.
Excellent. Sarah, was there anything else that you want?
I would just add, and I think that I wish I had known this when I first started, but particularly your first job, it's all about people thinking that they want to work with you. It's your first job out of undergraduate is not because you have the perfect skill set for this one role, because no one does. It's the companies actually, they know they're investing in you. And so it's whether they connect with you and whether they think that your drive and your passion kind of ignites other things, and that you are trainable. Those are the main things. So it's much more about knowing yourself as a person and coming across as honest and direct. And I think that if candidates knowing that when they first graduate is going to be, it just helps them relax. I think just relax and know it's more about your connection.
Excellent. Well, thank you all. So the last question that I do have is, if anybody watching wants to get in touch with you, is there a best way that they can do that, whether it might be through Twitter, LinkedIn?
Twitter, please. If you look at, so if you Google my name, Cassidy Williams, there's only myself and a Scooby-Doo character named Cassidy Williams. I'm the other one. And so it just, if you Google my name, you'll be able to find my Twitter and stuff. And that's pretty much the place where I will connect with you the fastest. And my handle is Cassidoo, Cassidoo. That's also my GitHub and CodePen and LinkedIn too, so you can find me.
I would say LinkedIn for me. Reach out by LinkedIn. And if you reach out by LinkedIn, let me know that you were on this call. Let me know that, because otherwise you'll be in the sea of other people that are, reaching out to me, and I won't have any point of reference.
Yes, please. Same.
All right, excellent. Well, thank you again, everyone. Appreciate your time tonight, and look forward to seeing you all again soon. Take care. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Again, this is the interview part 2, brought to you by Uncubed. Have a good night.
Thanks, Brian.